So I prepared a few slides, I guess just to highlight some of the main points, and then perhaps we can have a chat as we go through. Here we go. I mean, the first thing I should say is thanks for inviting me to say a few words about Quarto. I should also say I'm not an expert in terms of accessible materials, but maybe if I talk a bit about Quarto and its features, we can tease out, the benefits for accessibility. I started using Quarto about 2 or 3 years ago, mainly for developing lab materials for teaching R and Python. But I think it's got scope for general teaching resources. So I'll give a short introduction. I'm not sure if anyone has used Quarto before or not. There were some notes about Quarto in the spreadsheet, so I won't say too much about that. I've got some example outputs just to give a feel for what Quarto can do, and then I'll talk about my experiences, and I've got 1 or 2 student quotes that might be interesting to see. Okay, so in terms of why Quarto, I think if you're looking for a system that can produce resources which interweaves text, mathematical equations, code blocks, diagrams, interactive diagrams, then I think Quarto might be useful. So it's the next generation version of R Markdown. I didn't use R Markdown, I went straight to Quarto, but my understanding is Quarto has been designed to be multilingual from the outset, whereas originally R Markdown was designed for R. And I know you could then use later other languages, but I think it's designed to be have an appeal with more languages from the beginning. So as I mentioned, it's useful creating a variety of teaching resources and also different outputs. So of course, there's HTML, PDF files, PowerPoint files. But I think what's key, and I think this perhaps ties into some of the remarks that have been made in the earlier discussions, is that there's just one source file, and all you have to do is to change the output type in your source file to get different outputs from the same source file, which could come in useful for accessibility, I think. So you can also execute a variety of programming languages. So I mentioned R and Python, but also Julia, observable JavaScript, and many more. In terms of editors, I personally use RStudio still. One of my colleagues uses VS Code, but yeah, there's a variety of editors that it's compatible with. And in terms of setting it up, it's fairly straightforward. The Quarto website is very informative. There is a link there which I can share later. But there's clear step-by-step guides in terms of setting it up, and there's lots of resources there for actually creating outputs as well. Okay, so in terms of example outputs, so I won't use the link for the R teaching labs because I'm about to teach this module again and I've removed most of the content. So what I've done is I've tried to, let's have a look, get this running locally. So hopefully you can see this. So I created like a website hub where all of the lab sheets are in one place, because prior to this I was having on a VLE, lab 1 in one module, and then we move on to lab 2, and they're all in slightly different places. And the good thing about this is this is slightly more advanced, but you can create a search feature. So, if a student when revising wants to find out where we did the gamma distribution or something, then, they can just search for it here, which I think is quite useful. So of course, at the moment, I've just got lab 1 available live and no solutions because I haven't started teaching this yet, but this is what it would look like at the end of the module when we've gone through everything. If I just click on maybe one lab as an example. So hopefully you can see, you've got text, and then, we've got some tables. We've got these code blocks too, and you can decide whether you want the code blocks to be run and the output made visible in your output or not. And one feature I like is the fact that students can just hover over here and copy the code. I'll say a bit more about this later because this was one of the main features that drew me to Quarto, if I'm honest. Okay, so going back to my slides. So my ultimate aim with Quarto now is, in fact, and hopefully, can you still see this? I think hopefully you can. So what I would like to do is use Quarto to produce more general teaching resources where you can have the theory, examples, some interactive diagrams, and hopefully some quiz type questions for students to be able to kind of test themselves as they go through. So I have been experimenting with various different features, and this is something I've only just started doing. So for example, I managed to use observable JavaScript to be able to create an interactive gamma distribution diagram where students can vary the parameters and see how this affects the shape of the distribution. And the next one is a data-driven interactive diagram, which might be more useful in statistics. So this is using RShiny Live. And of course, the benefit with RShiny Live is that you can host this on a server rather than it only working locally, as with RShiny. So, I mean, this is a very classical example with RShiny in that we can change the number of the bins and then students can see how this affects the histogram. And sorry, I just need to move this out of the way. And then finally, I've been using the exams to forms packages to see if we can embed questions into teaching resources. So for example, so here we've got a question about the chi-square distribution. So we've got 7 categories. So I think so it'd be 6 degrees of freedom then. And students can check their answers. And also you can provide some more details as well, like this. So I think this has the potential to be quite useful in terms of teaching resources. And just to make the point, I created these PowerPoint slides using Quarto as well. So in terms of my experiences and accessibility, so I think perhaps the obvious things for me, but of course I think people in this group will know much more about this than me. Of course, producing the HTML outputs is more beneficial for screen readers from what I understand. But of course, with Quarto having the possibility of creating different outputs, I mean, what I do sometimes is, okay, I create the HTML output to get the interaction and to get the accessibility, but I can equally produce a PDF output so that students can have that if they want as well. And I can put this on OVLE. I think embedding the diagrams, even static or interactive, I do think that caters for different learning styles for students. So I think that's a benefit for Quarto. And for me, so I wanted to come back to this about coding. So my experience with teaching coding started with asking students to write out all of the code in a lab. And I just found that students were getting bogged down with this, or some students would, and they wouldn't be able to work very far through a lab sheet because they were spending most of their time just typing and then making small errors. And then I moved to the other extreme of providing R script files where students could just run blocks of code. And what I found with this was the other extreme students were just running big blocks of code and not really following, what the code is actually doing. So I like this idea of, excuse me, of Quarto where you can keep a handle on these code blocks. So you can create these code blocks to contain as much or as little code as you want. So I think it then kind of forces the pace of the lab somewhat. And I found this very useful. And I think that makes coding more accessible to more students in my view. In terms of some basic recommendations, if you've not used Quarto before, what I would say is just get it working on a very basic output first before moving on to anything too advanced. And also think about where you would host. So if you want to use the HTML outputs or where you would host this. So I'm quite lucky in that I've got access to a university server to host these outputs. Maybe think about a backup as well. Some VLEs might be more HTML friendly than others. So the one we're using doesn't seem to be able to host the websites that we're creating at the moment. But ideally they would. And the other thing is, even in the short time I've been using Quarto, it's quickly developed. and new versions get created. And I think it's important to keep up to date with the new versions and the new developments. And then finally, so student feedback. As part of a recent publication, again, there's a link to this here. I surveyed students on the Quarto outputs, and I've picked some quotes from the survey results, and in general the survey results are very positive about the outputs. And I noticed, in fact, so the second one talks about accessible, or the resource being accessible. And this is interesting because I didn't mention accessibility at all in the survey. So this is not something that I kind of led in the survey. So the students came up with this themselves, which I thought was quite interesting. And the last thing I've got is, if I open, where is it? So I've got RStudio open just in case anyone who's not used Quarto wants to see what it looks like. So I think Matt mentioned Pandoc Markdown. So this is what Quarto uses, and I've got a template file which is in fact made available with the publication I mentioned. So if anybody wants to just give Quarto a go, then this is a working file you could use if you wanted to. Yeah, so I'm happy to take any questions or start discussions about any particular part about this. I'm not sure, is that the sort of thing you were after?
Yes, no, that's I think that's quite a nice introduction for everyone. Does anyone have anything they want? Any other? I know other people have used Quarto. People. Daniel.
Hi. I've just been browsing the website as well, Quarto website as well. Am I right in thinking that you just need to install Quarto as a author, and the students don't need to do it, and you don't need your web server to have anything in particular?
Yeah, that's correct. So this, up until the survey, the students didn't even know I was using Quarto, because in the first year I didn't survey the students, so they were just using the outputs. So they did not need to have any interaction with Quarto. Yeah, you're right. So the Quarto is hidden really, or if you want it to be hidden, then it is.
Okay, so
yeah.
From their point of view, they're just seeing regular HTML with some scripting, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
Although in the survey, I did explain that Quarto was used to produce the outputs I was surveying them on. And I did ask them whether they would be interested in using Quarto themselves. And I can't remember the exact number, but the results were mixed on that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I should mention, once you install Quarto and you open RStudio, and you go to New File, then you'll see the Quarto document option. That's how you kind of get started with it.
It's useful. I'm just looking in the chat. Does Quarto have live preview when editing?
It does. So yeah, so for the latex, so for example, for this equation here, as you write it does preview, what the equation will look like, which is quite handy actually, because you can spot any errors then as you're writing it. And then for example, if I just want to preview this page fully, you just select render. I mean, this is a very basic output, and then it produces it. So you can run it locally within seconds.
Yeah. Good, thank you. Steph's asking, it doesn't look very accessible by default. I do know there are people actively working on improving the accessibility of Quarto, and I think, was it Matt who posted a link about someone using light and dark themes that I know are coming out. I do also know people have kind of got workarounds. I was looking at someone who had a Quarto site this week where they had PDF output and Word output and the HTML. Do you have anything to add to that?
Do you mean the accessibility of the website itself?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one thing, again, I'm not an expert in this, and I'm sure I could learn a lot. So if we look back at the website, it's gone now because it's so this here is the most basic output, whereas the website I showed earlier of the lab assignments. So that's a bit more advanced in that I included a class file with some basic HTML on how I want the website to look. So I'm sure somebody who's got more experience with accessibility could adapt that file or create a more accessible class file so that the website itself is more accessible. Not sure if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's helpful.
Yeah, I'm sure I could learn a lot myself, in fact, about that.
Yeah, and I think there are various add-ins and additions that are being made and you can be made. Lillian, you had your hand up. Did you want to add anything or ask anything?
Oh, no, I've added it to the chat. I think Braille R, if you're running that with RStudio, then it will generate the suitable accessibility description of any diagrams that you have, and then that would output so that you've always got that description available for any screen readers as well in terms of accessibility.
Does anyone else Josh?
Yeah, I was just so I'm using Quarto for some of my course notes as well, switching from a little bit of a mix of different document formats, and we had the same kind of problem with VLE support with it. There was workarounds, but I think that for us at least, that was the most fiddly part of actually getting the VLE and the Quarto to integrate nicely. The actual Quarto itself was really nice to work with. Yeah. What VLE are you using, Kristian?
Canvas. Which one are you using?
We're Blackboard, so it's
Blackboard,
interesting
right.
to know that that's a universal experience.
Yeah. I'm sure the technology will catch up.
Yeah.
But at least for us, it's as far as we're aware, it's not there yet. But
yeah.
That's something we can push to as a group. Sorry.
Yeah.
No, it's okay. Yeah, I was just going to say, we did previously use some R Markdown as well, and it was the same kind of problem with that. So it wasn't a new problem with Quarto so much as that kind of technology issue.
Yeah, I mean the SCORM package for numbers, that works well within Canvas. Yeah, it's a shame there's not something similar for this.
I do know, and actually I see Josh just said this in the chat, that Moodle is, as always, is slightly better for accessibility. So, but there we go. Anybody else who uses Quarto got anything else to add, or?
I mean, I'm not sure if I could ask a question to the group.
Yeah, go for it.
And this is about these coding blocks here, and what they think about this in terms of accessibility. Now, I have found the labs go much more smoothly with this because I give them one worked example where I split up these code blocks to try and force them to at least follow what's going on with that particular code block. And then I give them an exercise where they have to do their own coding, but most of the time they can just adapt the previous code. I'm just wondering what the group thinks about this in terms of accessibility. So students, they can hover over this, copy it, and then take it across.
I can jump in slightly, Kristian. So there's two things I'd say. One is there's accessibility of the page itself. You see at the moment when you hover over it, it gets kind of a blue rectangle around it. I found some of these issues with tabbing through the pages don't always work brilliantly in Quarto at the moment. And I've added little hacks so it's clear to the user that there is a button there. Because, for example, this button is not visible unless you hover with a mouse. Yeah. So I've written something to force it to be visible all the time so that everyone knows it's there, for example. In terms of usage, we talk about accessibility for the students, it makes it very easy for students to copy the text, paste it into their window and not even read it. So from the point of learning purposes, I have worries about this kind of thing, because I've run labs this year where students just copy paste massive chunks of text and they don't learn anything because they're not actually reading the text, they're just pasting and running it, and it gives lots of errors and they have no idea what's going on. So I don't want to make it too easy for them to just copy paste large chunks of code.
Yeah, I was worried about
bypasses
this.
learning.
Yeah, I was worried about this too, which is why I'd make sure there was exercises after each example where they would have to change enough of the code to be able to understand it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's always a tricky thing of kind of balancing for it from a teaching point of view too. Kristian raises a point that Quarto is an open source project, so we can send stuff to them and say, here is a code that makes your buttons always visible or things. And hopefully that could help them push things through.